Welcome. I'm Andy Thayer with the Gay Liberation Network, and today, as you saw in your screen intro there, we're very pleased to have State Representative Greg Harris. Greg has been a leader in the fight for equal marriage rights and equal rights in general here in Illinois, and we're very pleased to have him on this edition of CAN TV's LGBT Consortium. Greg, could you give our listeners just a little bit of a background about the struggle for equal marriage rights and civil unions in this state? What's going on?
Sure. I mean, beginning last year, I introduced a bill to provide equal marriage rights for same-sex couples in Illinois. Roll called all 177 members of the House and the Senate, and it was very clear that the concept of marriage was intertwined with religion and was sort of troubling to a lot of my colleagues. But they did understand the needs for committed couples to have basic relationship rights and protections. And subsequently, I've introduced a civil union bill which grants all the rights, protections, and obligations of marriage, but it is a separate chapter of the compiled statutes. It's called civil unions.
Okay, so what is the difference between civil unions and marriage in terms of so far as the government's concerned?
In Illinois, it would be a separate chapter of the law. It would be just about civil unions. It would not be the marriage chapter. But then you get to the federal government level. Right. Where most of the rights and benefits that people traditionally think of as something that married couples have, that's where that resides, and they still define those as something that only married couples can get. So until the terminology is changed either at the state level or is made more inclusive at the federal level, those rights will not be extended to people in civil unions or other similar relationships.
And that's in terms of the rights not accruing to our community with even marriage in places like Connecticut and Massachusetts and hopefully California. Right. That has to do with the so-called Defense of Marriage Act, isn't that right?
That's right, where they have strictly defined the word marriage itself to be between one man and one woman. And that's the nomenclature at the federal level that until it's changed is going to deny people a lot of the equality that we deserve.
Well, and the interesting thing about that is it seems to be such a blatant violation of not only the Equal Protection Clause of the federal Constitution, but also the Full Faith and Credit Clause, because you have states such as Massachusetts and Connecticut that would like to be able to celebrate marriages and are celebrating same-sex marriages, and yet a couple that's married in those states can't just move to Illinois and have their rights respected, and yet a heterosexual couple that's married, even if, say, someone would be considered underage by Illinois state law, right, if they move to Illinois, their marriage would still be considered valid. Isn't that right?
Right, and then you get into the whole issue of nomenclature. If there is a class of non-marriage relationships like domestic partnership, like they call it in California, or civil unions like we would call it in Illinois, are they interchangeable between states? If you have this in this state, what would it be in another state? And it just begins to cause huge legal problems, not only for the couples, but for the court system, for all of society. And there needs to be a standard and just equal treatment under the law, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and according to the General Accounting Office, over 1,300 rights and responsibilities just at the federal level, right, and that's typically replicated with a few hundred at least at the state level, are attached to the word marriage. And so unless you're prepared to change 1,300 pieces of the federal code of various sorts, then really you need the M word, marriage word, civil marriage, in order for people to truly access the same rights.
And it has to be redefined away from what the right-wingers have defined it as in DOMA.
Well, and it's very interesting in terms of the issue of DOMA, because we don't only have a federal DOMA, we have many states, including Illinois, that have our own statewide Defense of Marriage Act. Right. Where are things at in terms of repealing that here in this state?
At this point, that still remains in effect in Illinois.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it seems like we've got a very blue state here, and some of the clowns that gave us DOMA are hopefully out of office now, and it might be a time to start a drive against Illinois' DOMA and to get rid of that, even if we can't get civil unions, let alone marriage, at this point. Don't
Well,
you think?
and that's why it's so important to organize statewide, because it takes a majority of the House and a majority of the Senate to vote to do any of these things, and you have to look at the fact that. The representatives and senators do not just necessarily come from the Chicago area, but they come from the collar counties of Cook. They come from downstate. And all of those people need to understand that there are constituents in their districts, in their counties, for whom this is an important issue, and that they need to be respectful of their constituents' wishes.
Right. Okay, and we're going to be taking a call or two in a moment, but first just wanted to call your attention to an event that we've got coming up tomorrow in conjunction with Join the Impact. The Gay Liberation Network is going to be having our annual Freedom to Marry Day event at 11 a.m. tomorrow at the Cook County Marriage License Bureau. That's 118 North Clark Street. That's right across the street from Daly Plaza. And we're going to be trying to step it up this year. I'll just leave it at that. We're not just going to be... it's going to be a peaceful event. It's going to be a nonviolent event, but we're not just going to shout at the plaza or whatever. We're going to really push for equal marriage rights right here in Illinois with this event. Another activity we've got coming up that we're doing with a whole coalition of groups is the annual protest on the 6th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq. You see some information up there. It's going to be focusing on the Middle East wars. GLN is one of some 55 plus organizations that are organizing for this event, and that's going to be on Saturday, March 14th at 12 noon, assembling in the near the Little Village neighborhood at Marshall Boulevard and Cermak Road, just a couple blocks from the California Pink Line L stop. If you can read that on your screen, we're going to be marching to the heart of the Pilsen neighborhood. Some people may have been following in the news this past week and the week prior. We've had, unfortunately, yet another big permit battle with the city of Chicago. This seems to be an annual event with them. We have been successful in securing our right to a permit through appeal not only to the city's administrative law office, but also to civil court, where the city actually sued us. And we're happy to say we defeated an emergency motion this past week, which will allow us to march on Saturday, March 14th, 12 noon. Please join us. This is not only a march against the wars, it's also a march in favor of immigrant rights. We've got lots of area organizations joining us in that. But let's see if we can have one of our callers on the air and see what's going on out there in TV land. Caller, you're on CAN TV. What's your question or comment, please?
I have a comment. There's another thought about if you allow same-sex marriage, there's people out there have this thought. They say, what about the people that are Mormons that want to, where a man may want to have more than one wife, and they say it's beneficial in terms of child rearing, in terms of if women, there's a shortage of men, and it's a whole big other thought, and it helps in terms of running the household. If they start having same-sex marriage, people have to say, I want to have more than one person. It's a slippery slope. Where it going to stop?
Okay. Well, they said the same thing about allowing interracial marriage just a few generations ago. And it's very ironic that you should bring up the Mormon Church, which has been, unfortunately, one of the most stalwart opponents of equal marriage rights. It's just ironic that that they should have figured as prominently as they did in support of the anti-gay Proposition 8 in California. What are your thoughts, Greg?
Well, in Illinois, I can speak to the legislation we have in civil unions, which would say, 2 adults. That's what the law would say. 2
consenting adults, I mean, it's just ironic. So many of the religious arguments, the appeals to the Gospels for the reason to oppose equal marriage rights for same-sex couples were raised a generation ago against interracial couples being allowed to win the right. And back in 1947, when California became the first state to officially allow interracial marriage, it was very unpopular back then. It was even far more unpopular to allow interracial marriage than is the issue with same-sex marriage, and yet the courts did the right thing, fortunately, and going right on up to the early 70s with the Loving decision in Virginia, fortunately the courts again did the right thing in spite of overwhelming opposition to equal marriage rights for couples who were of different races.
And to me, it'll be interesting to see how in Utah this plays out. But the Republican governor of Utah, as you might have seen this week, Jill, came out in favor of civil unions in the state of Utah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that raises a very interesting issue, Greg, because where we have won equal marriage rights, I don't know the situation in Connecticut, and maybe you can tell me about this, but in Massachusetts, it was a Republican-stacked court which gave us equal marriage rights, and the California decision, which hopefully will be held, will prevail in spite of Proposition 8. The California decision, which defined gay people as a quote-unquote suspect class, i.e. a class of folks that are deserving of protections against discrimination and hence eligible for things like the Equal Protection Clause of various constitutions. Very big gain there. Again, it was a Republican court. What's up with that?
Well, I'll speak to what I know, which is Illinois. And here, we're working on a bipartisan basis and through the legislative process so that the representatives of the people can speak on this issue. And I think that's very important. I think it's important in Illinois that it not be a case where people can always say, oh, look, activist judges, look what they did. I think here in Illinois, the representatives of the people from the largest city in Illinois, the city of Chicago, to the smallest villages in central Illinois are going to, sign on to this, and they're going to say it's the right and just thing to do.
Yeah, but again, Greg, we're talking about the Republican Party, Republican judges in California and in Massachusetts. They did the old only Nixon can go to China, albeit in reverse. And it may have been completely cynical on their part. I mean, never put anything past judges or politicians, present company accepted. And yet we got equal marriage rights in those states as a result of those judges ruling on the merits of the case.
I don't want to think of them as cynical. I want to think as whether they're Democrats, Republicans, or Independents. They put on that robe, they go and they do their job, and they dispense justice under our laws.
But we've got, unfortunately, we've got a state that has got lots of democratically appointed judges, presumably, at least in the popular parlance, people would be a little bit more progressive, a little bit more inclined to support equal rights for various minority communities. And yet, we haven't even gotten a civil unions bill here. What's up with that?
Well, that's the difference between judges and legislators.
But we had the California legislature vote in favor of equal marriage rights, too. Not too long ago.
And I'm hoping that this year we'll see the Illinois legislature do the same thing.
Okay. Could you give us a timeline on when you think this bill will be, that you introduced for equal marriage rights, when do you think this will be coming up, Greg?
That's hard to say. I mean, we're just at the beginning this week, earlier this week, at the very beginning of the legislative process. Bills are just being introduced. Legislation would have to go to committee, have a hearing in committee, be voted out, go to the House floor, go to the Senate, go through the same process there. So, it's hard to put, a date on something like that because, the other thing we're faced with this year, too, is the state has a $9 billion budget deficit, which we have to deal with. And that's a question of how do we keep our hospitals open? How do we keep our schools open? How do we keep our senior services funded? And, a lot of other things may have to take a back seat to being sure that those vital services that keep people alive, are open and operating.
Okay, well, just hold that thought. Let's just see if we can get another caller here. Hi, caller. You're on CAN TV. What's your question or comment, please?
Yes. I would just like to know, uh, do you know if there's anywhere in history where they have first allowed gay marriage? And I agree with the other caller about it is some people that would start questioning the government, the law, and saying, well, okay, if we let this go on, what about me having 2 and 3 wives? I know people right now that, by us being more women's than men's, they want to help these people by having more than one wife, but the law don't permit it. So I would just like to know, what is your intake on that? And thank you.
Thank you, caller. Well, for one thing, you have a number of countries around the world that do allow polygamy. You also have got a number of countries such as Canada, such as Sweden, Spain, any number of other European countries that have allowed equal marriage rights for same-sex couples for several years now, some of them. And the sky hasn't fallen in. There hasn't been a polygamy bandwagon in those countries. And yet the countries where you do see polygamy, such as Saudi Arabia, other places like that, you're not exactly seeing a fundamental gallop towards equal marriage rights for same-sex couples in places like Saudi Arabia or Iran or what have you. So this whole notion of a slippery slope that, boy, if you give some people rights, then all hell's going to break loose. I mean, this is something that is an argument that has been used against equal rights for any number of different groups over the ages, and I think you have to take the issue on the merits of the case. If people are in a loving couple and they want to be able to for example, secure a future for their children, if, like heterosexual couples, that's very often a reason for people to get married. They want to provide a secure future for their kids. Well, there's many same-sex couples who are raising children who don't have that legal protection. And it's very interesting, Greg, that you brought up the whole issue of the complete basket case of the state's finances. Well, unfortunately, many people's personal finances as well. And equal marriage rights is also very much an economic issue. In these days where so many millions of people do not have health insurance, to be able to have access to your spouse's health insurance is something that is a survival issue for many people.
And I might point out that in the law we have proposed here in Illinois, straight heterosexual couples, especially seniors, are really interested in this. Because somebody who is married to their husband or wife for 40 years, and then say the husband passes away, should that woman remarry, she would lose her Social Security benefits.
Right.
But if she were to get a civil union, they would be able to keep their Social Security benefits, but they'd also be able to share a nursing home room. They'd be able to visit each other in the hospital. They'd be able to participate in healthcare decision making. So, I think that there are a lot of issues of basic fairness that this would address.
Well, and it is a real issue of, as you mentioned, if one spouse dies, it's very common for family members who hated that couple while they were alive together for the family to come in and steal the assets from the surviving spouse when one dies. Social Security survivors benefits and pension survivors benefits, those are survival issues for many of our seniors, and yet gay and lesbian couples are not provided with those same protections. And in these very perilous economic times, it's not just about, we want our relationship recognized by the state. It's also about surviving in
But Andy,
to
set the callers mind at ease. I drafted the law, and it restricts civil unions to 2 individuals. So we're not talking about polygamy here. We're talking about 2 individuals who are adults.
Well, it's very interesting because that both the callers should bring up the whole slippery slope argument, and we haven't heard the issue of, gay marriage will destroy heterosexual marriage. I think, fortunately, so many people are seeing through that transparently bogus argument that how would a same-sex couple being married somehow challenge someone else's marriage. If they're so insecure in their marriage that another couple, whether it be a same-sex couple or whomever, getting married would, dissolve that marriage. I mean, it just doesn't make any logical sense. Greg, we don't have lots of time left here, but I would like to have you tell our listeners what you think would be the most important thing that people should be doing right now to further equal marriage rights in Illinois.
Well, I mean, for this or any other issue, I think it's important, people, talk to their own legislator in their own individual district, and let us know your feelings. I mean, it's very important to me to hear from the people I represent, and I know it is for my colleagues as well, whether you support the issue or whether you oppose the issue, and not only this, but all the issues we face in Illinois. Mm-hmm. So I think people should, more than just going to the poll and casting a vote once a year, follow the issues that are in front of the legislature and let your voice be heard.
Well, and I think we got to tell people, look, we know that the state legislature has got a mountain on its plate with this $9 billion deficit, but marriage is a survival issue for our community, as it is any number of other important economic issues for our community and other communities. And so, no, we waited decades for equal rights, and yes, it is unfortunate that we're in such bad economic times right now.
And I will say, when you see 10,000 people come to Daley Plaza, like we saw, a couple weeks ago, in support of equal marriage rights. I mean, that ratchets up the importance of the issue when we look and we say, wow, 10,000 people on one of the coldest days of the year came out to support this issue. We pay attention, say, wow, this is an important issue to a lot of our constituents.
And march through the streets for about close to 5 miles without a permit that day. We can all blame that on Greg. That's his fault. He and I both spoke at that rally. That just raises one last question before we close out the show, and that is Representative Barney Frank has said, don't get out and demonstrate. That's old hat. Don't bother with that. Just call your legislators or write letters, and that should be good enough. How do you feel about that, Greg?
Well, yeah, I think both things have their place. I mean, there are a lot of different things that legislators pay attention to. Certainly, personal contact, phone call, a visit in our district office is important. Writing letters, signing petitions is important, but also, people, it's an American tradition of people taking to the streets to express their views, and that's very important also. So, I think each has a role. I don't think any one of those tactics will influence legislation totally, but I think together they all send an important message.
Okay, and just a few quick announcements before we close out today's show. Freedom to Marry Day is going to be 11 a.m. tomorrow in front of the Cook County Marriage License Bureau at 118 North Clark Street. That's right across the street from Daley Plaza. And we've got the big annual anti-war demonstration, this time also in favor of immigrant rights. That's going to be coming up on Saturday, March 14th, meeting down on the border of the Little Village neighborhood, Marshall Boulevard and Cermak Road. That's right near the Pink Line, California L stop. And if you liked what you saw here today, please drop by our next meeting. We meet the first Wednesday of each month at the Gerberhardt Library. That's Wednesday, March 4th at 7 p.m. And you should certainly check out our next television show, which is going to be Friday, March 13th, 6:30 p.m., the same station. Certainly hope you check us out for that. And then finally, if you need more information about GLN, please just go to our website, which is www.gayliberation.net. This has been Andy Thayer with Greg Harris. Thanks so much for joining us today, Greg. And you all have a great weekend. Take care now.